An essay on the way. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm the Historian, and welcome back to the 7th part of this essay. Damn, this is a long essay, at least a number of videos. And this one is gonna be I'm gonna continue on the decolonization. So we'll get to it. When it comes to the Vietnam War, then that was the last thrust, the last kill thrust for the imperialism and the colonization of the world. But why? Because that France and USA lost the Indochina colonies? No, they could have handled that. Was it? But because it was the media that was the true weapon. It was the media that was the true weapon, not the bombs and bullets. The North Vietnamese General Nguyen Giap. Yeah, fuck that pronouncement up. But okay, I'm gonna call him Giap, okay? Had actually a lot of help from an unexpected had a lot of unexpected help that no one saw until afterwards. Maybe did Giap know about this help and therefore put up his strategy as he did. But although maybe not. Giap used FNL, Viet Cong, a poorly armed guerrilla movement that hit hard and melted away in the population again, over and over again in South Vietnam. Why? To bind up troops and resources in the south, while he led the North Vietnamese army from the north, and could thereby take on fewer forces than otherwise. But this had another effect too. FNL fought in civilian clothes, often poorly armed, which meant that the reporters from the Western world's armies had with them took pictures of soldiers in civilian clothes and wrote about it in the newspapers and spoke about it in radio and TV. It looked like they were fighting civilians, while they were actually fighting guerrilla soldiers. Now they did a lot of civilian people died in this war, but that was usually a form of mistake. They were not strategic or tactical targets. But in media, this was raised up, and that led to a very heavy anti-war movement, especially in the United States. Even if United States won almost every battle with the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, or the FNL, the Viet Cong, they still lost the war because of their own reporters. Giap could simply just use war's first and foremost important truth. War is politics. If the political goal is not able to be achieved with the war, then there is no point of continuing the war. It is pointless. Giap didn't need to win the war. He just needed to win the politics, and that he did with media. Each and every one of these wars, the First and Second World War and the Vietnam War, drained the imperial powers of manpower, money and resources, but also saturated the media and the people on war, death and suffering. This gave together a very increased shifting power balance between armies, an increased dislike to war, or to fight to keep the colonies, and a far greater chance for success in a liberation war anywhere, no matter if it was in Asia or Africa. It affected just as much everywhere. Some colonies were considered more economically or political worth than others, and was therefore released a lot sooner, but essentially everything was released. So let's go on to the Cold War. Yeah, this is a big one. Let's get to it. When it comes to the Cold War, you can say that one can say that it was a direct or indirect cause of the Second World War. Again, the psychological stress in the people because of what media had done, brought the people didn't want a new big war, neither on citizen level or government level. So they needed a different way to fight, and that became through the so-called Cold War, by simply shaping up our armies, your defenses, in the purpose of deterring from attack. The Romans saying is still in use by the American army. Si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, cover for war. This was it was a very big arms race on both sides. Furthermore, it was substantial amounts of espionage done on both sides. But why? Why devote so much time and effort on espionage? Well, again, I'm gonna take a quote. Quote: "Foreknowledge cannot be drawn out from spirits. It cannot be gained by teachings of experience or by logical reasoning. Knowledge about the enemy's situation can only be given by other men, thereby the use of spies, of whom there are 5 types. 1. Local spies. 2. Court spies. 3. Turned spies. 5. Sacrificial spies. 4 sacrificial spies, sorry. 5 reporting spies. When all these 5 types of spies are in unison, no one can determine the secret pattern, which is called the god's marionettes, and is the prince's most valuable asset." Sun Tzu, The Art of War, 500 before Christ. The fact that Sun Tzu determines a whole chapter to the use of spies shows that it was an immensely important commodity already then. And it still is. That has not changed. Technology has changed, not the game. Espionage is just as important in politics as in war. Why? War is politics. The defining boundaries between war and politics was erased, even more during the Cold War. So, information was directly crucial and therefore espionage. The different political courses, capitalism and communism, went so far away from each other they just could during this era. And they both lended influences from the church, in my point of view. Namely, that they were missionary, meaning they wanted to add more and more countries to their own way of thinking. But why? Partially to share their own enlightenment with the world, partially to deny the other side a victory. But there is also purely material reasons, economical reasons, to spread your own way of thinking. The states that became allied became in many cases more or less vassals to their governing state. The states that became allies became in most cases vassals to the governing state, with a mindset as a way of thinking to how they were supposed to obey the governing state. As you might notice here, I have not specified if I'm talking about the Soviet Union or the United States. That's because what I've said is true to both of them. There's no real difference. But why did these two superpowers use old colonies as pawns in their political game? Well, all were looked for gave, as we have shown, psychological aftermath in the people, and therefore gave a reluctance to open war between the both superpowers. But they still had a deeply rooted conflict and suspicion to each other. So how do you go to war without going into open war with each other? Well, you go through it by using the small pieces on the checkerboard. If you think about the world and the political game as a checkerboard, then both superpowers begin with just as many pieces on the board, and the goal is to snatch all the pieces and eventually snatching the king. You grind down the opponent's resources with strategy. You also sacrificed the less important pieces to protect the important one. But if you instead envision the world and the party and the politics as a game of Go, it becomes a bit different. In Go, you start with the board empty, and the goal is to, with as few pieces as possible, control as much of the board as possible. Then the picture becomes a bit different if you look at the colonies and the vassal states. They become a way of controlling that part of the world and denying the opponent control of that part of the world. This way of thinking becomes quite resource effective, especially if someone else, as a vassal state, stands for the resources. And that's the one for this time. The next video is gonna be on the present and future, and probably also some valuations and some source criticism. So stay tuned and bye bye. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe.